Welcome to the deep dive. This is where you bring us the sources and we jump right in.
Yeah, no messing about. We dive straight to the material you've shared, the interesting bits.
And our job is to help you make sense of it, find those moments where it clicks.
See why it matters. Doesn't matter if this source is ancient scripture or something more modern, we find the relevance.
So today we're looking at some traditional texts and their commentaries that you sent over. Really fascinating stuff.
At the heart of it, there's this story, right? A narrative that's used to explain a Buddhist teaching.
And it features this monk who had a habit of, well, basically saying completely the wrong thing at exactly the wrong time, consistently.
Yeah, the sources give us the original story, but then you also get all this commentary built up over time, which is honestly crucial for getting the deeper layers.
Totally. So in this deep dive, we're going to explore this monk's, let's call it, peculiar habit. We'll uncover this surprising past life connection the Buddha apparently used to explain it.
Which is a whole story in itself.
Exactly. And then we'll get to the teaching that comes out of all this and really try to understand what it tells us about, the difference between just knowing stuff and actually having wisdom.
Accumulating facts versus cultivating insight. And yeah, like you said, it involves some pretty awkward social moments, a trip back in time, and this unforgettable image of a bowl.
Okay, let's dive in then. The curious case of Loḷudāyittheravatthu.
Loḷudāyittheravatthu. Yes, he's the monk the story starts with. And his behavior, well, it definitely got noticed by the other monks.
I'll say, the sources describe him going to houses where people are celebrating something good, a birth, a wedding.
Auspicious occasions.
Right. And instead of offering like blessings or happy verses, he'd recite stuff usually meant for funerals or times of loss, like that verse starting standing by the walls.
Wow.
Yeah. And then completely flipping it, he'd go to houses where there was misfortune, someone died, maybe places where those downbeat verses might actually fit.
And he'd recite verses about good fortune, like protection chants.
Yeah, exactly. Things like giving and righteous conduct, or even the Ratana Sutta, which is all about blessings and warding off harm. Total mismatch.
Every single time. And the sources make a point of saying he didn't actually realize. He wasn't being malicious or anything.
No, he genuinely thought he was saying the right thing for the occasion. That's key, isn't it?
It really is. That lack of awareness, that inability to judge the context.
So understandably, the other monks were confused. They saw this happening over and over.
A bit worrying, probably.
Yeah. So they went to the Buddha and asked basically, what's going on with Loḷudāyittheravatthu? Why does he always say the wrong thing?
And the Buddha's answer, it just immediately reframes it. He says something like, look, it's not just now he does this. He did this before, in a past life.
Ah, okay. So the explanation isn't in the present moment alone. It goes way back.
It's a pattern across lifetimes. And the Buddha says, I'll tell you the story from that past life.
Right. Let's go there then. Back to Varanasi long ago, according to these texts.
So, in this past era, the king of Varanasi was actually the Bodhisattva, the being who would eventually become the Buddha.
Okay.
And this king had a son, Somadatta Kumara. Now, in this specific story, Somadatta the son was the Bodhisattva, the future Buddha.
Got it. So the Buddha himself was the son in that story. And who is Loḷudāyi, the monk who says the wrong things?
In that past life, Loḷudāyi was a brahmin farmer. Name was Ajidaka. Made his living farming, had 2 oxen to plow the fields, and then, well, one of them died.
Oh, that's tough for a farmer. A big problem.
Huge. So the Brahmin goes to his son, Somadatta, who, was close to the king, and he asks him, son, can you go ask the king for an ox for me?
Makes sense. But this is where it gets tricky, right? Somadatta's dilemma.
Exactly. Somadatta, being the Bodhisattva, thinks, well, if I ask, it might look a bit informal, maybe taking advantage. But he also knew his father. The source uses this specific Pali word, danhapanyo.
Danhapanyon. What does that mean again?
It translates roughly as slow-witted or having dull wisdom. Basically, someone prone to saying awkward things, getting things wrong, not quite grasping situations. Somadatta knew his dad might mess up at court.
So he couldn't just send him. He decided he had to prep him. Serious prep.
Oh yeah, quite the production. The source says Somadatta took his father out to a cremation ground.
A cremation ground. Bit morbid for practice, maybe?
Maybe just quiet. Anyway, he sets up bundles of grass to represent the king, the viceroy, the army chief, all the important figures.
Like role-playing?
Totally. He coached him on everything. How to walk into the palace, how to bow, who to address, how to stand. And crucially, he taught him one specific verse to say, word by word.
The exact request. What was the verse?
It was clear and direct. 2 oxen I have, great king, with which we plow the field. One of them, deity, is dead. Give the second, Katiya. Just asking for 1 replacement ox.
Okay, simple enough. And the father practiced.
He did. The source says for about a year. Drilled it until he knew it perfectly.
Whole year. Okay, he should have this down.
You'd think. So the day comes. The Brahmin brings a gift. Somadatta goes ahead to announce him, gets him in to see the king.
The big moment. All that rehearsal. The king welcomes him.
King asks what he needs, and the Brahmin, probably buzzing with nerves and enthusiasm after all that practice, he recites the verse. And he messes up 1 word. Just 1. Instead of saying dihi dutiya, give the second, he says gata tutiya, take the second.
Oh no. After a year of practice asking for an ox, he accidentally tells the king to take his last remaining one.
Exactly that. Complete opposite of what he meant. The source says the king, who was the bodhisattva, very perceptive. He got it instantly, saw the mistake.
What did he do?
He was mused, apparently, smiled. And then he turns to Somadatta, the son, and says, sort of wryly, I suppose you must have many oxen at your house, Somadatta.
Nice line. Gently pointing out the absurdity, maybe teasing Somadatta a bit about his dad. How does Somadatta handle that?
Very smoothly. Quick thinking. He replies, there will be many deity if given by you.
Oh, good save. Turns it right back around, focuses on the king's generosity, not the mistake.
Exactly. And the Bodhisattva king was apparently really pleased by this clever response, by Somadatta's quick wit. So instead of just 1 ox,
he gave him more.
Way more. The source says he gave the Brahmin 16 oxen, plus ornaments, and even granted him a whole village.
Wow. So the mistake, born from being dantapanyo, slow-witted, actually led to incredible good fortune.
Paradoxically, yes, because of the king's wisdom and generosity and Somadatta's diplomacy.
So bringing it all back, the Buddha finished telling the story to the monks.
And he connected the dots. He said the king in that story, the Bodhisattva king, was Ananda in the present life, his attendant.
Okay.
The Brahmin farmer, Ajidatta, the one who made the mistake.
That was Loḷudāyittheravatthu.
That was Lolutayi.
Yeah.
And Somadatta, the clever son who trained him. That was the Buddha himself.
Right. So the Buddha's point was crystal clear. Loḷudāyi's habit of saying the wrong thing wasn't new.
Not at all. It stemmed from his apasataya, his lack of deep learning, his limited understanding, a trait that was obvious even back then, when a whole year of practice wasn't enough to get 1 crucial word right.
And this whole explanation, the present problem linked to the past life, it all leads up to the main teaching the Buddha wanted to share, right? Crystallized in a verse.
A very striking verse. He said, this person of little learning grows old like a bull, his flesh increases, his wisdom does not increase.
Grows old like a bull. That image really sticks. Let's unpack that based on the commentary the sources provide. What exactly does little learning, apasutaya, mean here?
Well, the commentary gets specific. It says it means someone who lacks knowledge of key parts of the scriptures, like certain sections or important suttas. Not totally ignorant, maybe, but definitely not deeply versed in the core teachings.
So it's about a lack of engagement with the wisdom tradition itself. But then the commentary adds something really interesting, a contrast.
It does, and it's crucial. It says that even someone who knows very little scripture but takes up and practices just 1 small subject of meditation, a kamahana, that person is considered to have bahusutta, extensive learning.
Wow, okay. So learning isn't just about how many books you've read or texts you've memorized.
Not at all.
Yeah.
You can know just a little bit, text-wise, but if you're actively working with it, practicing meditation based on it, you're considered extensively learned.
That completely changes the perspective. It's about application transformation, not just hoarding information.
Precisely. Depth comes from engagement, not just collection. Okay, so then the bull, simile, grows old like a bull.
Right.
The commentary explains, a bull gets physically old, big, strong maybe, but if it's past its working prime, it's just aging. It's not useful anymore. It's just existing fruitlessly.
Okay, so applying that to the person of little learning.
They age in a similar way, fruitlessly. Because they haven't really internalized the learning that leads to wisdom and practice, they don't, fulfill their duties properly, maybe to teachers or the community.
And crucially,
they don't engage in meditation or other practices that actually transform the mind. They just get older without that inner development.
And the next line, his flesh increases. What's the commentary say there?
It sticks with the bull image. An old bull, maybe released because it can't work, just wanders around, eats, drinks, gets physically bigger, fatter.
Just consuming, getting larger, but without purpose or contribution.
Yeah. And applied to the person, the source describes them as sort of relying on others for basics, like monks relying on the Sangha for food and robes, but focusing only on the body. It even mentions things like using laxatives just to maintain the physical self.
Oh.
They become physically large, maybe, but are just kind of wandering, metaphorically speaking, consuming resources without contributing to the real purpose, the path.
So it's a powerful image for being stuck on the surface level physical comfort, maybe even just collecting information without it leading to inner growth. And the punchline, his wisdom does not increase.
Yeah, the commentary is pretty blunt there. It says, their wisdom, whether worldly understanding or the deeper, transcendent kind, it doesn't grow at all. Not even by an inch is the phrase used. Stagnant.
Okay, so if wisdom isn't growing, what is growing in that space? Is it just neutral?
No. This is where it gets really pointed. The commentary says that instead of wisdom, what does increase is craving tancha and the 9 kinds of conceit, mana.
Craving and conceit. The big ones, the roots of suffering, ego.
Exactly. The source says these unwholesome things are fueled by input from the 6 senses, seeing, hearing, etc., and they grow like weeds, like creepers taking over a forest.
So it's not just that accumulating knowledge without wisdom is useless, like the bull's flesh. It's actually harmful because it creates the conditions for craving and conceit to grow instead.
That seems to be the implication. The space isn't empty. If it's not filled with growing wisdom, it gets filled with growing delusion, growing attachment, growing ego. The energy that could go into understanding gets diverted into feeding these unskillful states.
That makes the teaching much sharper. It's not just about being unproductive. It's about actively cultivating the opposite of the goal if you're not careful.
It really highlights the risk of knowledge or experience that isn't integrated, isn't used for internal work.
So bringing this all back to you, listening now, what does this ancient story, this commentary, this verse about the bull, what does it mean for you today?
Because, yeah, it's not just about monks thousands of years ago. It's about how we handle information, learning, experience right now in our lives.
Or are you maybe just accumulating flesh? Are you gathering facts, reading articles, listening to talks, gaining life experience? But is it actually leading to a change inside? Is your wisdom growing?
Or are you kind of passively grazing on information, letting it build up, maybe making you feel knowledgeable, but without that active engagement, that reflection, that practice that turns it into real insight? Remember that point from the commentary.
Yeah, that even a little bit of focused practice counts as extensive learning.
Much more than just passively consuming volumes of text.
So true learning based on this isn't just about filling your head. It's about using what comes in to actually reshape your understanding, to cultivate wisdom, and crucially, to stop that unchecked growth of craving and conceit.
The story of Loḻudāyi, his past life mistake, the Buddha's explanation, it all points to this core message summed up in that verse about the bull. Knowledge without wisdom is like that bull's flesh, may be impressive on the surface, but ultimately fruitless, and worse, it can feed the things that keep us stuck.
Which leaves us with a question for you to think about. As you learn, as you experience things, how are you making sure it's feeding your wisdom, not just increasing your flesh? What are you actively doing with what you encounter?